If we've not met, Kevin Roberts, the Executive Director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's a privilege to lead this organization. We think we're the largest outside Washington, D.C., and I certainly know that regardless of however many employees we have, which is something like 100, each of them a cheerful warrior, we punch above our weight. And usually you know that we have, which is a good Texas thing to do, you know that usually when we have events like this, we're talking about policy, we're talking about sometimes numbers and data, and we'll cover some of that tonight, but we decided, given that it's Black History Month, given that we look at this auditorium as the people's auditorium of Texas, that this is a really important conversation to have. And so we are going to cover a wide range of topics tonight. This is going to be conversational in style, and my job really is just to ask some halfway decent questions and get out of the way.
Okay.
Now, one thing that does concern me, Chairman White and Colonel West, is that neither of you likes to talk. And dare I say, excellent choice in sport coat, my friend.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You bet.
Yes, sir.
Let me do some formal introductions, which neither of you wants, but I think your service deserves. Colonel Allen West served 22 years in the United States Army. He served in several combat zones and received many honors, which I will list. Bronze Star, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 3 Army Commendation Medals, 1 with Valor, and a Valorous Unit Award. In 1993, he was named the U.S. Army ROTC Instructor of the Year. And we know that in October of 2010, he was elected to the United States Congress, representing Florida's 22nd District. He's a Fox News contributor, contributing columnist for townhall.com, and holds a bachelor's degree from the other UT, the University of Tennessee.
Volunteers, Tennessee Volunteers.
He has 2 master's degrees, one from Kansas State and the other from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff Officers College. The second most important thing about Colonel West is that he's the director of our Booker T. Washington Initiative. The most important thing, as he would say, is his wonderful wife and 2 wonderful daughters. Sir, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Looking around the room, I'd see a few faces who are also members of the Texas legislature, as Chairman White is.
Just a legislator, after reading that.
Yes.
No.
No, sir. I was just about to say, even with their presence here, I'd say you're one of my favorites.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah,
for that.
so-
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So when your colleagues are up here for another event, they'll expect the same sort of thing. That's true, and I will say, before going through some formality here, which you also deserve,
Okay.
especially as a veteran also of the United States Army, that when TPPF is looking for someone to lead on an issue, in your case as chairman of the House Committee on Corrections, Criminal Justice Reform, you're always there.
Yes, sir.
Your answer is always yes, let's go take
Yes,
it.
yes, go take
And
the
so I
hill.
just want to thank you for that. Chairman, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Chairman James White is a native Texan, born in Houston. He attended Houston ISD schools before graduating with honors from Prairie View A&M in 1986. Sorry to list the date, it does date you, sir. He had a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and completed his doctorate in political science at the University of Houston. He served in the United States Army. He was assigned with the Berlin Brigade from 1987 to 1990 during the demise of the Soviet Union. And after leaving the Army with an honorable discharge in 1992, Representative White began a career as a public school teacher in the Houston area. And he taught some things that I taught as well: United States history, Texas history, geography. You did some coaching. You were even an official of youth sports. And you were elected to the Texas House in 2010. As I mentioned, you're the chairman of the House Committee on Corrections.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for making time.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
So the title of our conversation tonight is, are the principles of Booker T. Washington still relevant? And if you've done any study of Booker T. Washington and his principles, you know that our conversation this evening is going to run the gamut from public policy to economics to how our Creator made us to be hard workers and hopefully oriented toward liberty and civil society. Before we get to any specifics, unfortunately, we have to spend some time talking about Booker T. Washington. And I say unfortunately because as a teacher of history, I know that one of the great travesties in American curricula today is that we don't have enough students who know about Booker T. And so, first question, gentlemen, we'll start with you, Colonel West, as the director of this initiative. Tell us about Booker T. Washington and why we need to know more about him.
Well, you know, I was born and raised down in Atlanta, Georgia, and you know, one of the things we learned about was that incredible speech that he gave September the 18th in 1895. There, you know, one black man who 30 years prior was a slave, speaking into this incredible audience about, you know, let's look into the future of the black man and the woman and allow them to have their industrial abilities to help rebuild the South. But even more important, you know, Tuskegee Institute at the time, now Tuskegee University, my godfather was a Tuskegee Airman, William Sticky Jackson, and my cousin graduated from Tuskegee. And of course, most people know Tuskegee for one thing, the Commodores, you know, Lionel Richie. But when you go back and you study Lionel Richie and Commodores. But when you go back and you study what he did, it was so powerful. And early on in Atlanta, Georgia, there were just two black high schools. One was David T. Howard, the other one was Booker T. Washington. And there was something about that high school and the pride that they had there. It just engaged you. Because this man did things that I think still have relevance for today, because he did not want to be a victim. And he was given an incredible task of establishing an institution of higher learning in the South for recently freed slaves. And he did it. And I think that that's what the American spirit is all about. Give us a hard mission, and we do it.
Thank you. Chairman White,
Yes, sir.
what would you add to that? What is it about Booker T. Washington, his principles, his example as a great American that we all need to know about?
Well, piggybacking on some of the concepts that Colonel West has stated, just the idea about the American experience, that 30 years after someone had been enslaved, he would have the opportunity to address such a large crowd of Americans. Within 3 or 4 decades, he would establish an institution of education and write this seminal book, Up From Slavery. And I think that's a big takeaway, that the American experience of liberty, freedom, equality, when you put those together and allow people to exploit or use their individual God-given talents, you just have some magnificent things that happen in this country. When you look at black people, you say this is Black History Month. Interestingly, it was a week. It became a History Month when, by order by Gerald Ford, that's a Republican. That's interesting, right? But anyway, though, when
that might often be forgotten.
Yes, right. Yeah, for some reason. Yes, but saying that, just think about nowhere but America, where you have the largest cohort of black people that are the most prosperous because they live in a country that values freedom and individual God-given talents. And nowhere but America could we have seen within 2 generations a group of people, again, enslaved, in bondage, quickly gain a high level of literacy. And look, let's just put it out there. Just shortly after 100 years, only in America could someone, Barack Obama, let's put it on the table, become president, okay? So as certain elements of this country want to tear down or fundamentally transform values and principles, it's these values and principles that have allowed black people to rise up in such relatively fast.
Mm-hmm. So does it concern you as a legislator that we don't have enough Texas children learning about the example of Booker T. Washington? Because regardless of their own ethnic background and our own, that his example is one that each of us as Texans should be emulating. Absolutely.
When, I know you probably have a canon that you would assign all of us to read because you're a great history professor. But in this
history professor, you could probably lose the adjective.
Okay. But I would say every American, we should have this canon of readings that includes our Declaration of Independence, probably even before that, other founding documents, the Constitution. But I would say that part of that canon should include Up From Slavery. And so the idea that, yes, it is unfortunate that many young Texas blacks do not know the significance of Washington's impact on on U.S. history. But I think what's also important, really, and I'm not going to put anybody on the spot like this, but how many of us have read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington? It is by far the most inspirational biographical essay, I believe, in American history.
I agree. In fact, when we republished Up From Slavery with a wonderful foreword by my colleague here, I took a copy home to my wife, and I said, I didn't want to presume she hadn't read it, but I assumed that she hadn't. And I said, you probably should read this. Well, she starts reading it that night, and she said exactly what you said. She said, Kevin, this is the most inspiring thing I've ever read. Why wasn't I taught this?
Yes.
Why aren't we teaching our kids generally across America this book? And so, Colonel West, what's the answer to that question? Our audience here, we're not going to put them on the spot, probably are like my wife saying, man, I need to read this book. Why haven't I read this book? Why hasn't that happened? Why is it not part of the curriculum?
I think that when you look at America, America is the juxtaposition between individual sovereignty and freedom and the institution of government. And when you sit and you read the Constitution, when you read the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers established that the individual and their freedom, their liberty, their sovereignty was supposed to be superior and higher than the institution of government. But over time, that balance has shifted. And so the institution of government has taken more preeminence over that freedom of the individual. And therefore, what has happened is that the institution of government needs more victims. The institution of government does not need victors. Because if you have more people that are looking to the institution of government for their needs, their subsistence, they're completely dependent upon it, then they get power. And so the power in the United States of America is transferred from the individual who's supposed to be sovereign to this faraway thing called the institution of government, being it our city and local governments, being here at the Texas State Capitol, being it up there in Washington, D.C. And the story of Booker T. Washington says that even in the most horrific conditions, you can start walking from present-day West Virginia and end up in Hampton, Virginia, and get an education and rise up to become one of the greatest orators, one of the greatest educators, a person that hosted an American president and his institution, a person that was invited into the White House. And understand, this is the turn of the century. I mean, Jim Crow, segregation is all happening, but here's a man that is in the White House that was born a slave. That's powerful.
Yes.
And that's why it's not being taught. Because God help us if all of a sudden people realize that they have an innate ability through the equality of outcome instead of the equality of opportunity to achieve.
Sure. And given his experience and the difficulty that he experienced, not just in building Tuskegee Institute, but of course all of the social difficulties of being African American in the United States at that time, he's not at all naive or Pollyannish or dismissive of those realities, right?
No.
So for people who've not read the book, or maybe you've read it a long time ago, as a reminder, he calls a spade, and I think that's one of the great features of Booker T. Washington as a great historical hero in America, is that the great leaders in our history, the men and the women, regardless of their backgrounds, read reality truthfully, and yet they have this optimism that each of us as Americans possesses. And I think that is the real relevance to everyone in the United States about Booker T.
You know, I think that the chairman and I will agree, having both, served in the military, is that leaders tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And that's the power of him saying the things, the truth to power, instead of going out there and saying the things that tickle people's ears and make them feel good about themselves. And so that's what we're also lacking, is the truth tellers that are going out there and say, you can rise up above this situation. This is what you have to do. And in a constitutional republic like we live in America, there's an incredible responsibility on the individual. And again, I think that we're ceding too much of that responsibility over to someone else to just do it for us.
Chairman, I'm curious, when you were teaching history,
Yes, sir.
formally, I'm sure you teach history all the time,
Right.
informally, right?
Mhm.
How did Booker T come up? What were the reactions to that? And also, just to roll three questions into one, what do you make of this comment that Colonel West just stated about America, some Americans really wanting to find victims rather than victors?
Well, let me start with the first scenario. I mean, probably because it just sells better, right? I mean, we've got this popular media where it just sells better that you're a victim instead of a victor. I would say in the classroom, of course, a lot of my classroom experience dealt with the middle school and high school. Probably didn't have that much time to delve into the deeper elements of Booker T. Washington. So as far as his accomplishments and that sort of thing, probably so. But I would say on the collegiate level, and then even beyond that, just instructional for me as a member of the Texas legislature. And the speech that Colonel West alluded to, I believe he said 1895, Colonel West in Georgia. And if you don't say up from slavery should be in that canon, definitely that speech should be in the canon. And what always reminds me in that speech, the one excerpt where he talks about this ship that is, drifting aimlessly, in the middle of the water. And 3 times, other ships pass the ship by, and the people that are stranded on this ship ask for help, they ask for water. And I believe it was the 3rd time when the other ship that was a potential rescue ship that they were yelling at to help them, they needed water. The members of that ship told the folks that were stranded, or thought that they were stranded, cast your bucket where you are. And when they cast their bucket, in the story that Booker T. Washington says, they pull the water out, and it's the fresh water of the Amazon. And he uses this as a way to talk to 2 groups in the South. The Southern blacks that instead of getting into these, this stuff about leaving America and going to a foreign land, that you should really cast a bucket where you are with your industrialness, with your knowledge of agriculture, with your knowledge of the mechanics. And then, interestingly, it kind of sounds eerily the same as another very, very prominent politician today. He tells Southern whites, instead of relying on foreigners to probably come in and build up the South, you should join with Southern blacks to build up the South as an economic power. So, especially when talking with other groups as a member of the Texas legislature during this period of a year in Black History Month, is to remind people, Americans, regardless of their color, their race, ethnicity, etc., that we have so much right here that we can draw from. And again, I said that sounded eerily kind of similar to another great politician today that's elected, probably in the White House.
Sure. I wonder.
America first.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but
Yeah.
I think that's true. I wonder if he's read up from slavery.
Never know.
Well,
We can tweet it to him.
well,
You tweeted to him.
from your mouth to God's ears. So to keep us out of trouble there, and now that I've said that, I know you'll return to that. I want to raise a bit of a controversial topic for historians and sociologist types who study the evolution of the American Black intellectual movement. And Booker T. Washington certainly is one pillar. Another pillar, a name that's probably more recognizable in some circles, is W.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
And I think because where we're going to end this conversation a little while from now is a question for each of you about the future of America and the future of race relations. And I guess the point that I'm trying to drive home early on, and I would like each of you to comment on, is do we see evidence of not just that division between Southern blacks and Southern whites, but what we might call regular Americans regardless of their background and Northeastern elites in this division, this debate, this argument between Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois?
Well, without a doubt, and I think that you still see that division within the black community, period, between an intellectual elitism and people that think more so about, as Washington, education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance. You know, when you go back and you study the history of the NAACP, it was actually founded by two white progressive socialists. I mean, the woman was a member of the Socialist Party of America. The other gentleman was, without a doubt, turn-of-the-century progressive. But they brought in W.B. Du Bois, who was once an ally of Booker T. Washington. They brought him in to head up the organization. And what they really focused on was not so much this thing about, you know, getting out and toiling and working and productivity and everything like this. More so, they wanted advancement through protest. And that has been a real big chasm. And again, let's call it as it is. You know, so many people refer to Booker T. Washington as the Uncle Tom, as the sellout. And you will read, some people call his speech that he gave in Atlanta a compromise speech, when he was sticking his finger in both sides' chests, as the chairman just brought out. And so when you look at, you know, what came from that split, you know, one side has the talented 10th, these intellectuals, and going to these universities and becoming more enlightened. And then the other side, you had folks that were just out there, you know, working hard and what have you. And the one side looked down upon the other side that was out there advancing themselves through productivity. Now, I think you still have that in the United States of America today when you look at the respective coasts in the Northeast and whatever. And what do we call the rest that's in between? We call it flyover country. Like, they don't really matter. You know, the people out there that are working hard and toiling and everything like that. Not to say that I'm against education, but the crux of what Washington presented. Remember, it was Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. So it was the normal education, it was also the industrial education. And people have to understand this. The students of Tuskegee built the school.
They literally built the
They
school.
literally built the school. George Washington Carver, the man that did all of those incredible experiments with the peanut, where did he come from? Tuskegee. Agriculture. Why did they select Tuskegee to be the place to train black fighter pilots? Because of Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, because they were already talking about the relevance of physics and science and math and how you could apply it. And so I think that the challenge we have today is to go back and make education relevant. Not just the book learning side, as the old folks say down south, but the ability to go out there and do something and be productive. And somehow we have looked at, come on, how many of y'all remember high school? Wood shop? Automobile mechanic? Huh? Where are those programs today in our high schools? Because all of a sudden people said that, you know, that wasn't important. And so this separation between intellectual elitism and the hard work and productivity, which Washington talked about, the pride in labor, we're losing that battle.
A lot of things to tease out from there. And so Chairman White, the first one, if you don't mind, is sort of one last thread about the Washington-Du Bois debate. We keep it high level without getting into the weeds. But what that response from Colonel West made me think about was that one of the rotten fruits of intellectual elitism, especially in the United States, is inevitably that it leads to socialism, socialist thought, and inevitably it leads to perhaps something equally terrible, which is divisiveness, which by the end of his career, unfortunately, that's what Du Bois was talking about. Washington was always, to your earlier point, talking about unification and working together, and often that position was mischaracterized, and unfortunately, some of my historian colleagues still do that now. I'm curious what the relevance of his preaching about unification and working together is today, given that you have elected colleagues, not necessarily in the legislature, but in Congress, who are elected because they are preaching, if you will, divisiveness in the United States. How do we use Washington, in other words, to overcome that?
Well, I think it's instructive to remember that I think at one point in time, Du Bois was in Ghana as a communist. Okay, so I mean, there you have it. Okay, but that's
For those of us old enough to remember the Cold War, this is bad.
Yeah, well, this was really before the Cold
Yeah,
War,
right.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
he was a doctrinaire, ideological communist, okay? And it took him to Ghana for a while to reside in that country. But, you know, that's probably conjecture, right? You know, for this discussion. But, you know, yes, when I look at my district, where I'm proud to serve, Polk, Tyler, Jasper, Newton, Hardin County, it's that flyover country that you referred to, Colonel. And they are very sensitive to the elite preachiness, okay? But with the divisiveness, I think, yes, our political culture could learn something from Washington. The idea that, and something that when the Colonel talked about woodshop, auto mechanics, I took woodshop in high school, and you know, what those experiences taught you, Kevin, is how to work. Not necessarily, you know, how well you can manipulate wood and that sort of thing. That, you know, that's part of the course, but the value of work and how to work. You know, maybe now if there are woodshop classes, you have probably Apple iPad type ways to sand your wood, right? But when I went back at Lamar in Houston, you actually had to have the sandpaper, and the wood was never smooth enough. Now it had to meet a certain standard, and I can't say the standard it had to meet because it talked about a certain part of our body, and so I'm not going to say that.
Yes, sir.
That's what my instructor would say. No, James, go back. You need to keep sanding. It's not smooth yet.
This is a technical term.
Like a baby. Okay, all right. So it taught you how to work. So so there's a lot of currency in victimization right now. There's a lot of currency in divisiveness right now. There's not a lot of currency in honest, brutal discussions about how do you unify around central principles that have really built this country. There's not a lot of currency in that, which should be, but there's not a lot of currency in that right now.
It's interesting. Thank you for that response. As we've overcomplicated almost everything in life, including even what a human person is,
Yes, right.
that we have overcomplicated one of the features of our nature, which is that we are hardwired by our Creator to do hard work.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what the color of someone's skin is.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if they're in Texas or Iowa. They are hardwired to do hard work. And there's a fancy intellectual who's in the think tank business. He's a very smart guy, Arthur Brooks, who calls this earned success. It's just a fancy way of saying, as we said in Louisiana public schools, getting some blisters on your hand. That we have lost in education. And so now I want to pivot explicitly to the applicability of Washington's thoughts to public policy.
Yes.
And I want to spend some time, because I know it's an interest of many of our audience members, on education. Tell me your reaction to this premise. We have a false egalitarianism in the United States, measured by the percentage of students we say ought to have a 4-year degree. And that is evidenced by the declining percentage of 4 and even 6-year graduation rates in college.
Interesting.
Take that and run with it.
Look, you know, this belief that everyone must go to college, I think, like you say, that's a false narrative. You know, when I was serving in Congress down in South Florida, the maritime industry, one of the biggest maritime in the world. But what was always interesting to me when all of these yachts and crews would come in for servicing of these multi-million-dollar beautiful yachts, guess what? The crews were from New Zealand, they were from South Africa, they were from, you know, Australia, everywhere else, but right there, the maritime capital of the world. And so I sit back and say, okay, why is it that we are not in school teaching and training kids in high school even to be able to go out and service these yachts, to be able to go out and be a crew on a yacht, to rise up and be a captain? You know, teach them scuba diving. Scuba diving is all about Boyle's law, physics, math, computations. Do you know that an underwater welder starts out $80,000 to $90,000? But the point is that we are driving our kids to believe you have to come and sit up here at the other UT, and we sit down.
Set myself up for that one.
1794, baby. Okay.
You're that old?
Yes. I wear it well. But we are telling our kids that you must be in this system so that why? We can have these professors, these intellectual elites start talking to them about social justice and how you've been cheated out of this or you've been cheated out of that. You know, instead they could be out there doing things, and guess what? Then they can create their own business. From Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Normal Industrial Institute came some of the greatest furniture makers in the South. That's what we're talking about. Not just going out and sitting around and getting some degree in underwater basket weaving. The next thing you know, you got to be a barista up there at Starbucks, and you're complaining about all the college debt that you have.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I feel that we've got to change. I call that, again, it's that culture of the participation trophy. Okay, adults looked out there and saw little Johnny sitting on the sideline. And little Johnny didn't get to play, you know, soccer, football, baseball, whatever. And they said, we got to feel sorry for Johnny. So we'll come up with this little trinket. And we'll give that to Johnny to make him feel good about himself, his self-esteem. See, when I was growing up, Mom and Daddy would have said, you need to get your butt out there in the backyard, and you need to hustle a little bit more, throw the ball a little bit more, learn to catch, so maybe they'll put you in the game as a wide receiver. But we don't do that. We have devalued the importance of productivity. That's what we've done. And so it's very easy. Everyone's the same. Everyone's equal. That's what we're going to preach. Well, in case y'all haven't noticed, I'm 5'9". I cannot dunk a basketball. I'm pretty good at distance running, but that's the talents that I've been given. And I learned how to be productive with the talents that I've been given. Instead of people saying that, remember what I said, equality of outcomes, we're going to determine for everybody. Instead of an equality of opportunity that says that however you are talented, go out there and make it happen.
Chairman White.
Yes, sir.
What do we do about the implications of this false egalitarianism in Texas? And in particular, we have a workforce crisis. You know this well, I would presume, in your district.
Yes.
What are, not to put you on the spot necessarily in terms of real specific policy solutions unless you have them, but for our audience members who are thinking about the legislature being in session, thinking about how we've just identified this problem pretty clearly, and then what are the solutions? What as a legislator would you propose as solutions to this problem?
Okay, well, if I could take a little bit from the question you posed to
You may do
Colonel
whatever you
West,
would like.
and then I'll get to that. I graduated from Prairie View A&M University. It was the first, and for a while the only, land-grant college. It's known as a historically black college university, established here in Texas. And when you go back and read the history of it, you notice some commonalities with Tuskegee. You were allowed to come as you were. But when you showed up, usually the first thing you did was they put you to work, okay? And that was out in the field or around the university, or in this case in Tuskegee, building the university. So first, the basics. You always have to have the basics, whatever it is. Football, combat soldiering, there are basics to legislating too, believe it or not. Okay.
We'll come back to that
basic,
later.
yeah, but basics. So first, valuing work, as the Colonel discussed, okay? 2, reading. It is criminal if these figures are correct, and I think my legislative colleagues in the audience have been told the same thing. We have a miserably, based on the monies that we spend, thank God we have the expectations, but the monies that we spend, we have a miserable low rate of third graders that are able to read at the third grade level. It is an indictment on the legislature, what we've done or haven't done. It's an indictment on the school districts, what we've done or haven't done. It's an indictment on the families. Yes, the families. This stuff, and the basics, the family. Take Secretary Ben Carson in his biography. His mother could not read, But what she did, she instilled in him the value of reading by making him read to her. Now, he didn't probably know that she couldn't read, but it's the family. So these things have to start in the family. So you have to have reading. You have to have the principle, the value of work, industrialness, being able to do mathematics, being able to think and reason. When you talk about specific policy measures, policy prescriptions, I have to lean on the corrections, because I do a lot of stuff with prisons. Okay, that's convicted all the way to the death penalty. That's what my committee has oversight of, and hopefully you will not be a subject of my committee. Okay, because you're either being convicted, incarcerated, hopefully rehabilitated, reintegrated, but if not, you're probably going to be executed. Okay, that's what we do. In thinking about Booker T. Washington, individuals, the human is a God-given creation. It is not a cookie cutter. You're dealing with the most complex and unique creation of God. And so the idea is when we deal with men and women that have an intersection, a very adverse intersection with our criminal justice system, we have to remember that. We have to remember that there was a failure somewhere with the family, with education, with the church, because there are three ordained institutions, right? Mm-hmm. The family, the government, believe it or not, it is ordained. We may not act that way. And the church, okay? And the reason why we have this incarceration is because there's a dysfunction of those. Going back to the kernel, not because we had people talking down to you and that sort of stuff. We had dysfunction in these institutions. So it's important, to the extent that we can, when we're rehabilitating and preparing people for the reintegration, that we have to replicate those. And wrapping this is what I have found anecdotally. I'm sure there is a scholar that will come out with the policy paper on this, but those justice-involved incarcerated folks in TDCJ that eventually successfully rehabilitate and reintegrate, they have had two transformations. In Wyndham Independent School District, which is our school district within the TDCJ, that has prepared them to some level of skills, and they've had a transformation of the heart with the chaplaincy.
And that's a recipe for success.
Yes.
That's getting back to basics.
Back to basics. Got to do the basics.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, Colonel West, sticking with this policy thread about what the solution is, whether it's Texas or even at the federal level, do we need to do more technical education?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does that look like from a policy perspective? Thinking about the investments, as Chairman White said, that we're making in public schools, the amazing, to use a neutral word, it might be amazing positive or amazing negative, investments we make in higher ed with very little ROI. What does it look like from a policy perspective to get more students deciding to work with their hands?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to stop having politicians that demonize those type of programs in schools, because so often people are saying that you're saying that this individual that wants to go do auto mechanic, woodshop, or whatever, they're not smart enough. They can't go off and go to college. Well, no, that person may end up, being the one that comes to your house making $25 an hour as a plumber because you can't do it. And guess what? And then the next thing you know, they own a plumbing business and they just sit back and they call other plumbers to go out and do everything else. Look, the Bill Gates didn't go to college. So why do we continue to push people into these four-year institutions and go out there and get degrees that are not enabling them to go out and be productive? Why do we, constrain people? I'm not saying that you push people into a path, but you provide these opportunities. You provide these avenues that they can take advantage of. And, some people are very happy with that. Some people, music programs even, back in the high school level, because you can develop that talent for musicians. And, another part that's important for music is math. because you have to know beats and rhythms and things of this nature. I have always said that there needs to be some type of public-private partnership in our schools, so that, you know, if you're teaching Pythagorean theorem, why do I care about Pythagorean theorem? What the heck am I going to use it for? But if all of a sudden you bring in someone from a landscape architecture and design that comes in and shows the practical application of Pythagorean theorem in the work that they do, and then guess what? If you're making an A and a B in this course, then we give you the internship. And then the internship leads to something else. So you look at all of these different, the welders, the elevator mechanics, the escalator mechanics, all of these different professions that are dying out, but we still need them. So why aren't we, you know, starting in high school to develop that technical track, and then they can continue on to a technical institute, and then they can be the ones that sit back and look and say, oh yeah, you got how many millions or whatever dollars of college debt? Well, I'm going to work, and you call me when you need me to fix your pipes, okay? And so again, we have to value those things, and it comes back to policy that says these are valid alternatives, instead of really smart people that come back and say, oh, that's for the dumb kids. That's what we used to hear. That's for the dumb kids. That's where the dumb kids go. That's not. That's where kids that have an innate ability and skill and talent, that's where kids that understand their own individual freedoms, liberties, and sovereignty, they can go and thrive. But until we have politicians that, again, stop wanting people to be victims and dependent upon them and want to unleash that indomitable human spirit, we're going to keep chasing our tails. So that's what we have to do. Stop telling kids, if you want to get out there and work and do something with your hands, you're a dummy. Minimum wage jobs. I was so happy when I got that $3.25 minimum wage job growing up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. But look at what is happening today. We're telling grown-ups that you're supposed to have a living wage for a minimum wage job. We're telling them that working at McDonald's frying French fries is a career. What does that do to the young people? The young people that learn financial responsibility and accountability and showing up for work. I was so proud when at Sears and Roebuck, they put me in charge of a department. And I was just 18 years of age. Now, how are we missing out today? Those are the type of things we have to do.
Yes, sir.
And I remember one day when I was still in the classroom and I was palling around with our building principal after school, and we were talking about some of these things. And he said, James, what do you think, which textbook do you think is the toughest textbook on this campus? Well, I just said, well, maybe my government textbook. He goes, no. I said, okay. And so I got a little bit more serious. I said, it probably it's that calculus textbook. He says, no. He says, the toughest textbook on this campus is that textbook that's related to a technical vocational course, because there's no special education way of wiring a house. Either you're going to wire it, or there's going to be some other scenarios happening, okay, and you're not going to like it, okay? Either you're going to plumb the house a certain way, or you're going to have some other scenarios. After being elected in the legislature, I was invited by one of the plumbing locals near my district, and they had some type of, I guess they call it a rodeo or something, and you go there and you listen to the apprentices, and listen to their experiences. And on the table, it was like a long lunch table, they had all of their textbooks, their plumbing textbooks. And I will tell you, Kevin, I went through each one of these textbooks. I thought it was just going to be, get this pipe here, and this is 2 1/4, and this one, and no. I saw physics. Yep. I saw geometry. I saw algebra. I saw some tough stuff in these textbooks. So I'm with the Colonel here. I think we will find out that these technical vocational courses are extremely high-level courses in math and science, and we need to promote them because of that.
Thank you both. There's just a tremendous dignity in whatever work we do,
yes,
regardless of the perception of how sophisticated or simple it may be. There are a lot of other questions I would like to ask, but I'm sure our audience will formulate them better than I will. So we've entered the phase, if you two gentlemen don't mind, when we will pitch questions to the audience. If you're in the audience, we, of course, would like for you to ask a question. Do a couple of things for me, if you don't mind. Wait for the microphone to come to you once you've been recognized, just so we can keep order. And secondly, we have this custom. You know, we're conservatives here, so we believe in custom. And there's a custom that we ask our comments in the form of a question. And the moderator reserves the right to cut you off with a smile on his face if you're being loquacious. So with those...
That's one of those intellectual elite words for talking
Yeah, right.
too much.
Loquacious.
That's exactly right.
All right, talking too much.
We just say, shut up.
Shut up.
If I have to ask a second time, that's what I'll say.
Okay.
No, thanks for understanding that. First question, I think, sir, you had your hand up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Potentially controversial question, but I'll jump right into it. I'd be curious to get your gentleman's opinion about what Booker T. Washington would think, and actually what you each would think, about this notion that's been advanced by some of the Democratic candidates for the presidency involving reparations. It was somewhat surprising that that issue has come up, and I was curious as to what you think the political motivation is and what the practical considerations are as far as it relates to the campaign.
Colonel, you want to feel that?
I think it comes back to what I said initially. It's victims or victors. Booker T. Washington could have sat there in West Virginia and waited for someone to give him something. And he could have complained, and he could have whined about how bad life had been for him and how bad he had been treated. He all of a sudden saw freedom. He said, now I can make a decision for myself. What decision will I make? I can sit here, I can whine and complain and wait for someone to take care of me, or I can get off my duff. And I've heard about this place called Hampton Institute. And I have yearned from a little boy when I used to peek into the schoolhouse windows and see the little white kids with books. And you know what he said? I want some of that. We have to teach our young people to want something greater than just the crumbs.
Yes.
Okay? And so it's very easy for folks to come out and say you're a victim and you're owed this. At the age of 15, my dad sat me down on the steps of 651 Kennesaw Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. And he said, son, there's no greater honor than wearing a uniform in the United States of America. And I want you to be the first officer in our family. My dad was born in 1920. My dad fought in World War II at a time when this country didn't look at him as the same way he looked at some other people and gave him the same rights. Now, he could have been bitter. He could have been ugly and nasty about it, but you know what? From that corporal in World War II came a Marine Lance Corporal who served in Vietnam, an Army Lieutenant Colonel that did 22 years and went on to be a congressman, and now his grandson is a major in the United States Army. If you allow people to sit down and make you a victim, they will make you a victim. I reject this mentality that I'm owed for something I didn't experience.
Yes.
I really didn't. I live in the greatest nation that the world has ever known. And there's no way that the kid from the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, born in the same neighborhood that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., could grow up and be the congressman representing one of the highest per capita income zip codes in the United States of America, Palm Beach Island. Rush Limbaugh was one of my constituents.
Chairman?
Yeah, real quick. I think Booker T. Washington would say, as he said in Atlanta, the South would not revive itself by taking from one group and giving to the other. You need to create more wealth amongst all of you and bring everybody up, okay? So that's kind of interesting how we're going to take from one group and give to another group, and somehow that should expand local prosperity. Also, I've kind of thought about this. I kind of caught something on this. I don't know how that, now you're talking about me, I don't know how this would work. My wife is white. I mean, I don't know how that would work. Would she be giving me something? I don't.
We'll let you be the first to tell her.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work. So, and I just say that into, drawing from these wise words of the Colonel, we need to be thinking about building up everybody in the country, not tearing one group down and taking from another, giving to the other. We need to know what can we bring together to the table to lift up all the country. Okay, so I just, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, sir. Mike's right around the corner.
With reference to your discussion about vocational education and giving folks an opportunity, from a policy standpoint, what would Washington have thought, and what can we do to create more opportunities, and in particular with reference to the plethora of occupational licenses in Texas and the inability of many felons, once they're out and clean, to get a license to be a beautician or something else that they could make a living at?
Great question. Mr. Chairman?
Okay, thank you for teeing that up for me. Again, I'll go back to that speech of Booker T. Washington. I don't think he said the government of Alabama or the government of Texas or the legislature of Georgia, or he didn't say Congress needed to do such and such. He said the black people of the South and the white people of the South. So maybe we just need to stop, other than for making sure we have safe communities and a few other basic government services, maybe we should stop asking Congress and maybe even the Texas legislature to do things. We need to rely more on our local businesses, our churches. That's the wealth. That's the spring of American ingenuity. It's those institutions, the family, the church, in your local government and your business. To the occupational licensing, you will see a number of bills filed this session. This occupational licensing is out of control, and we need to get control of it real quick. The plumbing board's sunset is up this session, okay? And I believe one of the recommendations is to not require someone to have a GED, a high school diploma to sit for the plumbing exam. Just recently, I got a little comment from a constituent that is a longtime plumber in my district, and he said, "This is horrible. Don't you know the importance of what plumbers do? And we're gonna just have a disaster." And I asked him, "Do you think anyone without high school education could pass the plumbing exam?" He said, "No." So I said, "Don't worry about it." Okay, don't worry about it if they don't have the high school diploma. So with that, we need more thoughtfulness. And when it comes to people that have intersection with the criminal justice system, and we are not allowing them to work, we're going to finally get a real smart lawyer that will sue the state of Texas or sue some governmental entity, because I think it's some violation of the 8th Amendment when these criminal records are impacting people in a negative way well beyond their sentence. Maybe I've teed it up for a lawsuit.
Sounds like it.
Right. So we need to look at that. And I have to tell you this on the wrap. I'm looking at many of you. You support a lot of our candidates in a very prolific way. Many of them are quite skeptical of these ideas that you and I are talking about. So as you are giving them support, will you please get a commitment from them not to stop my bill or kill my bills on this?
I think you just taught us one of the basics of legislating.
Right, yes.
Very, very well done, sir. Next question. Yes, ma'am. Mike's coming your way, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello. My question is kind of all over the place, so you might need to help me on that. But the moderator mentioned overcomplicating issues, and one of those that, in my opinion, is the state of cannabis in this country. And so with the potential for the hemp industry, savings and cost of corrections, and cost-efficient treatment for vets, how are we as constituents able to convey such a touchy subject, or recommendations for such a touchy subject?
Just
how are
because
we
of the
to have
sensitivity of the issue?
the sensitivity, and it's just so multifaceted. How can we really, I guess, pitch it at a local level when at a federal level it isn't being addressed or prioritized,
Okay.
so to say.
Colonel?
Is that complicated?
I don't know if I'm the right guy to ask about, you know, marijuana or anything. Look, I never smoked or drank in my life. And when I think about what we're doing, you're basically telling the whole generation of young people that you're not eligible for service to your country. Because as far as I know, the military hadn't changed their standards as far as drug use. And if you go back and you look at what is happening in Denver, there are a lot of second and third order things with, you know, opening up, you know, cannabis use has really affected people. How do you stop someone that is out there on the highway that is driving under the influence of marijuana and kill somebody? Now, you know, again, remember what I said about freedom?
Mm-hmm.
Individual freedom has a very, very high responsibility. I can't remember the Supreme Court justice that said this, but he said, your right to throw a punch stops at my nose. Now, if you're going to sit in your house and you can drink all the daggum Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, smoke all the dope you want, but the minute you come out of that house, you impact my life, or the life of my wife, or the life of my daughters. And I think that we have to have an incredible level of responsibility when it comes to this thing about drug usage. And I don't know if the American people have gotten there yet. Now, there are means by which we can treat veterans and we can treat others without the THC being a part of that. And I think that that's one of the things we should look at. But I am really concerned about we have an over-medicated, drugged-out population in the United States of America right now. I mean, there are too many people on every kind of drug whatsoever. I mean, when I was growing up, if you acted out, yeah, that boy need a belt.
They had some medicine.
Okay.
They had some medicine. All
They had
right.
some medicine.
Had your
But see,
medicine.
now, I mean, you know, Junior's 4 years old, and we put him on Ritalin. And we just get them hooked on these things, and they continue to be hooked on it, and they never get the opportunity to reach their full potential. So again, I mean, I understand this thing about, you know, I should be free to do whatever I want. That's a very uber libertarian, you know, perspective. But that freedom comes with an incredible responsibility. And so that's my answer on that issue.
Chairman, did you want to add anything Texas specific to that?
Real quick. Thoughtfulness, as the Colonel said, in the hands of a physician with peer-reviewed research, with consultation with the patient, there may be some medicinal purposes there. I'm not a medical doctor, so that's not my province. I think we should provide physicians and patients the necessary freedom to sustain life and save life. Okay, thoughtfulness. As your chairman of the House Committee on Corrections, exercising thoughtfulness, again, off the wise words of Allen here, is what is the impact on public safety, okay? And then from there, you go to the appropriate approach as far as criminal offenses. So I do not like marijuana. I have never smoked marijuana. Unlike many politicians, I have the urinalysis, and as a public school teacher, I have the record. You can go back and find out. I've never done it because I got the test to do it, and I don't think people should do it. But I think there is a level of thoughtfulness as we approach it. So we would say, probably in my policy area, those things which I am scared of, those people that I'm scared of, we probably need you in one of our 104 TDCJ units. Things that I do not like, behavior I do not like, we should probably find other means to get the behavior from you that we like, okay? So maybe days and days and days and days in the county jail on the taxpayer dime. Maybe that's not the most thoughtful way on a marijuana offense if it's just possession. Maybe we just need to get you out in the track in the hot sun and run it out of you for a few miles, okay?
Or your mama can get a switch.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
Question in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Evening.
My name is Sandra Crenshaw. I am here for the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. I'm a former, I received the Outstanding Texan Award back in the early 1990s. And during that time period, I also served a short term on the Dallas City Council, where we started the curfew for youth. You said on the corrections, we want to try to do things to keep the kids from even getting to that particular level. And so I wanted to start off by thanking the director for having this policy, and the two African Americans who are sitting there that have the guts to say the things that need to be said in spite of sometimes being criticized for being part of the other party. But I wanted to ask you, give you this little situation. In North Texas, in McKinney, Texas, I don't know if you got this feed throughout the state, but we had about 75 young African Americans that scaled a fence into a private gated community. And you saw the police officer that was called on the scene trying to get control over everything, and he told, one of the little girls had on her bathing suit, and he told everybody to get down, get down. Did any of y'all see that situation here? Okay. I had a chance as a—
Ms. Crenshaw, what's your question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were a sweet lady. I was going to let you go, but what's your question?
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need more people to be brutal about what needs to be done and what needs to be said. I really, just let me finish this, Jose. I won't take too much longer.
30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds is good.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I had a chance to meet with those kids, and those kids said that they had a right to swim in that swimming pool. They did not know that the reason why they had a gated community was so that the people would not use tax dollars to buy the swimming pool, because they didn't want to swim in the same swimming pool with black people. And so they thought that they had a right to do that, and they thought that they were exercising civil disobedience. The kids didn't know, were not taught, Chairman White, that when a police officer says get down, that that's what they're supposed to do. So I'm hoping that you can, like when Paul Rackstow was in the legislature, he made it mandatory that everybody had to be a registered voter. And so I would like for you to see if you can mandate that the children know that when they get stopped by a police officer, put their hands on the wheel, and they only have one right, the right to remain silent. Is that something that you think that you can do legislatively so that our children are educated and not relying totally on the parents who don't know themselves?
Thank you, ma'am. Good question. Chairman White?
Real quick, I think we passed that legislation last session. I believe it was Senator Royce West that was the author of that legislation, that our schools now, they have a little curriculum, and we will teach students in the public schools how they should interact and engage with police officers. But I mean, all this is just fascinating to me. I was taught to obey all adults, and then if there was a problem, to report home to my mother and father and say, this is what happened, and then they would go and deal with it. So children should comply. We should have respect for property rights, and that is not the best example of civil disobedience, okay?
Colonel?
Look, I think it comes back to what the chairman talked about earlier, one of the basics. One of the basics is the family. You know, when I was born in 1961, a two-parent household in the black community. You can do the research, 75 to 77%. What is it today? 24%. You know, I learned right from wrong from my mommy and my daddy. And once upon a time, you know, if I did bad in school, I did not want the teacher or the principal to say, I'm going to call your mom and daddy. That was the worst thing ever. I would do whatever needed to be done in that school. I'd stay there till 6 o'clock at night. I'd clean up everything. But don't tell my mom and dad. The worst beat down I had in my life was when I was down in my dad's hometown of Cuthbert, Georgia, Randolph County. And little Alan's bebopping back to Granddad's house. And when I got to Granddad's house, the phone had already been ringing and everything. My dad knocked me clean to the floor. You know why? Because when I was walking back through that neighborhood, all the old folks were sitting out on the porch. And I did not say, hello, good afternoon, ma'am. How you doing, sir? And you know what my dad said? You are destroying my reputation. And that's why I got that beat down. See, we need to have our kids understand that they are conveying our reputation. They are our legacy. But the problem in the United States of America right now is you got too many daggone parents that will listen to Dr. Spock and they think they have to be their kid's friend. My two daughters will tell you, I was a benevolent dictator. Okay? I loved them. But the thing is, there are rules. And now they appreciate it. So that's one of the basics. That if we want to do things right, it starts in the home. It starts in the church. I didn't fall asleep in church, even though my mom was up there singing in the choir, because there was somebody on that pew that popped me upside the head. Okay? That's just how it was. And that's not child abuse. I think I ended up pretty good. I think you ended up pretty good, Chairman.
Pretty good.
Okay? I survived. And I think it was Nietzsche said that which does not kill us only serves to make us stronger. Discipline serves to make us stronger. Discipline tells you that you don't climb a fence into a gated community and you jump into their pool. And then you come back and say, I have a right to be there. No. Work hard. You can have a house in the gated community and you can have your own pool.
So culture is upstream from politics and policy. And I think that's something Booker T. Washington would have reminded us of all the time, which is why he was such a disciplinarian at Tuskegee.
You know, the one thing that Booker T. Washington said you had to have when you showed up at Tuskegee, toothbrush. If you couldn't do that small little thing, how could you be trusted with the greater things? And the most important thing was to every single day to brush your teeth.
Yes, ma'am. Mike is right around the corner for you.
Mine is not so much a question as a statement about the book.
Yes, ma'am.
Booker T. Washington walked all that way to go to Hampton. And then when he got the school started, people came from all over the country, blacks, to go to that school. And it was brutal. I mean, they worked outside, I think, 8 hours a day.
Yes.
They studied. I mean, there was no free time at all, but kids ate it up. They came and they worked extra so they could, if they didn't have the money to pay for it, they did extra work to earn their keep. I think kids love that.
Kids want structure. Kids want boundaries. And the chairman and I, you know, we saw soldiers that came into the military, they're just bad actors. But you know something? They loved their platoon sergeant, their drill sergeant, their first sergeant, because you know what? They were someone that was filling in a gap that had been missing in their lives. The life of discipline, the life of responsibility, the life of setting higher standards for yourself and achieving it. You know, when I went through airborne school back in 1984, Sergeant Black Hat, that's what we call them, the airborne instructors. He taught me that if you set the bar low, you'll jump low. Set the bar high.
One more audience question before we conclude. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you do. It's one of the rules. Sorry, you need the mic.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is perfect too, because I wanted to ask, and I know there's a certain word for it, but because I didn't want to use mandatory, but what are y'all thoughts about mandatory military service afterward?
No.
No?
Why?
Because it is a privilege to serve in the United States military. It's not a right. And having been a battalion commander, I will tell you that I don't need to spend 95% of my time on 5% that don't want to be there. You want the people out there defending you to be the best and the brightest and the most courageous and the most dedicated that this country can offer. Not someone that's just there to say, they told me that I had to be here. So again, there are other things that can be done, the Peace Corps, Forest Service, whatever. but your military, those are your guardians. You know, so.
So last question I get to ask.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
yeah.
I was gonna let the guy with the Texas stuff.
Texas, yeah.
This
He
is-
got all the
I went
Texas
to Texas
stuff.
too. I get the last question.
Oh, here we go.
So, one of our other, you should know that by now.
I do know that. Is that a quasi-orange tie? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called burnt orange, I think. It depends on
Pumpkin.
how things are going on the basketball court, which is not too good right now. Because you got our coach who's doing a really
You
good job.
fired your coach.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Remember that now. My question is not about basketball, Chairman White.
Yes, sir.
But much more serious question about the future of America and the future of race relations. And I know that that's very present on the minds of Americans, even those who don't respond to the victimhood kind of narrative that some folks like to advocate, even those who really find it egregious that there's all this chatter about divisiveness. But given your position in the Texas legislature, your service in the Army, your view of the world, is there reason for us to be optimistic that what Booker T. Washington told us was possible? That is, that people of different backgrounds can get together and work together for a better civil society can still happen in the 21st century.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for this opportunity to have this discussion with you. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, seriously, I am concerned about the mood in the country. I am concerned about certain elements that will try to stoke or in the currency of racial divisiveness in our politics. But again, I have to go back to a point I made earlier in this session. American black people are a testament to what this country is. On no other country, and as I said at this Black History event in my district, American black people represent the largest group of black people in the world that are the most prosperous and the most free, okay? And nowhere but America, even with the challenges of slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination, and all the other stuff, there's no other country in the world, on no other continent, that we could have the success that we have with American blacks. And it should say this to all of us, that if we value our individual God-given talents, we value freedom, we value prosperity, and taking just a little bit on that other question is, we shouldn't need a draft. We should have enough young people in this country that if we ever get in a big conflagration, we will have enough to defend liberty. But with that, American black people are really the promise and the hope of this country. And because of their success, we know that this country works. So I am optimistic, but obviously there are dark clouds on the horizon, but we have reason for optimism.
Thank you. Colonel West?
Same thing. I believe that, you have the storms, you have the dark clouds, but as it says in the Bible, joy cometh in the morning. The clouds will pass over, there will be a rainbow that comes out. It's no other place in America than America that affords you these opportunities. And I just once again believe that there are so many people out there that want to stoke those fires to keep us separate. Case in point, last week, I was speaking in the state capital of Mississippi. Here's a kid, 1961, when I was born, and now I'm opening up the House of Representatives in the state of Mississippi. Wow. No, don't clap, because it's not about me, but it is about what you can achieve in this country. But the sad thing is that on that very same day, Jesse Smollett was turning himself in just a little bit further north on I-55 in Chicago. Now, where were the cameras? Were the cameras there in the Mississippi State Capitol to show a young African-American man opening up the State House for their legislative session? Were all the cameras up there in Chicago showing Jesse Smollett? We got to look at ourselves and say, we don't want to have a part of this division, of this divisiveness. Are there people out there that are chuckleheads, that are prejudiced? Absolutely. But institutionally in the United States of America, I can't think of a better country that I want to live in.
Amen. Amen.
Great way to, yes, thank you. It's a great closing thought, and as yours was as well, James, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Just want to mention a few things. One of the things we try to do in these conversations here is talk about next steps, because we can sit here for an hour and have a good conversation, and there's value in that. But just to summarize, I think our two panelists are encouraging each of us to leave here and do a few things. Number one, to make sure that we're part of building civil society rather than tearing it down. Number two, to get a little more specific, to encourage some young person or even some middle-aged person who's been thinking that they could never achieve a four-year degree, or maybe they've tried and not succeeded, to pursue some vocational education. I think if each of us does that at least once in the next year, we're not only going to help that person, we're going to help society. And that's a real spirit, if you will, of Booker T. Washington. And the third thing is something you do immediately, which is that we have a gift for you tonight, and that is a copy of Up From Slavery, that with the foreword from Colonel West. If you have not read it, or it's been a long time since you've read it, please pick up a copy. There's probably enough out there for you to take for a friend. We encourage you to do that, because I think Booker T. Washington is one of the, not just a great American, but one of the most underappreciated great Americans in our history. Most of all, thanks for being part of this conversation. This is how TPPF likes to participate in building a healthy, vibrant civil society. We wish you a great evening. To our panelists, you're a great Texan and a great American, Colonel West.
Cool.
Chairman White, great Texan, great American. God
Cool.
bless you, and God bless Texas.
All right.
All right.